Happy Saturday. It is July 12th, 2025, and you are listening to Morning Meeting. I'm Ashley Baker in London.
And I'm Michael Haney in New York City.
And before we get into the new episode of Airmail and Morning Meeting, our favorite Trump absurdity of the week is his interaction with President Joseph Boakai of Liberia. Trump complimented Boakai on his English and asked where he learned to speak it so beautifully. But apparently he was having some sort of senior moment because he forgot that Liberia was founded in part by free Black Americans in the 19th century. Oops. In other news out of Africa, a new report reveals that the country's 4 richest people hold more wealth than that of half of the continent's population combined. There are now 23 billionaires in Africa, and Nigerian Aliko Dangote is the wealthiest. He's known as the cement king of Africa, with a fortune estimated at $23.4 billion. If the world feels like it's gone mad, come hang with us. We have an entirely new issue and episode that is here to provide relief.
Yeah, it sure is. First, for those who knew him, Matthew Pietrus seemed larger than life and well on his way to a place atop the pillars of New York society. He was chief of staff to the family of George Soros, the billionaire investor. He was listed as a producer of Broadway shows such as Cabaret. His name was even etched on the wall of the recently reopened Frick collection. But following his sudden death on May 30th at the shockingly young age of 40, rumors began to fly of lies, theft, and fraud. And Jane Boone, one of his closest friends, is going to join us with her answer to the question, was Pietrus' life all just make-believe? Then, 50 years ago this summer, a man swimming off the coast of Sicily found bronze statues of 2 Greek warriors buried in the sand. His discovery was a sensation in the art world, as the statues, which are believed to be left over from an ancient shipwreck, dated to the 5th century BC. Soon, the 2 warriors were among Italy's most prized art treasures, but as our colleague Elena Clavarino reports, there's a deeper mystery around how the statues were discovered and why they may have ended up off the coast of Sicily. And finally, there are few individuals these days who we all can admire, but one of them surely has to be Clint Eastwood. He's 95 now and still working, and his extraordinary life is the subject of a terrific new biography by writer Sean Levy, and he will join us to talk about a man who is surely one of the titans of Hollywood. So Ashley, where would you like to begin today?
Well, because we are incapable of resisting any sort of grifter story, let's start with Jane Boone and the story of Matthew Pietrus. Jane is a novelist as well as a journalist who's written for the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg Businessweek, and McSweeney's. Welcome, Jane.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Jane, in the issue this week, you reflect on your late friend, Matthew Pietrus, who died recently, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding his death have led to a lot of questions about how he lived. He was quite a colorful figure. Tell us a little bit about first how he was known to the public, and then tell us how you met him.
So Matthew was quite young when he died. He was barely 40 years old, healthy guy, fit, active, and really connected. He was on the board of the Metropolitan Opera. He was a big donor to the Frick collection, which had just had its grand reopening, where we all celebrated in this really extraordinary and lavish gala. He worked with NYU's libraries to fundraise, and he hosted all these wonderful events there. I mean, the guy really knew how to have a good time, and he was very generous with his friends. At work, he worked in the private family office of a variety of very wealthy people. The most recent job was with the Soros family, and he was on the verge of taking a new position, at least that's what he told us, with the Qatari royal family. And before that, he worked for Courtney Sale Ross, the widow of Steve Ross, who was one of the legends of the media business with Time Warner. And so he was surrounded by extraordinary wealth. He was plugged into how to spend money in ways that, quite frankly, as his friend, I was quite thrilled to be part of. But his background was actually quite modest. I first met him in 2012 when I was working on a whim as a background actor. I was on the set of Law and Order SVU. It was a crowded party scene, and we're all killing time and holding. And this really handsome young guy sits down next to me, and we're like shoulder to shoulder at this table. And we started talking, and I found him fascinating, which was a great surprise. He's a young guy. Why is he going to want to talk to me? I was in my mid-40s at the time. And yet he spoke of his time at NYU. He had an MBA. He'd worked in Afghanistan, he said, with the UN. It was just a charming encounter with a guy I wanted to meet again. And I'm an introvert. I don't give out my business card very often. And this was someone I wanted to connect with. And then he made that happen. And so we became friends. And it was a kick to have this unlikely fellow part of my life. My husband was then the chief content officer at Time Inc., so a pretty big job. And we had a lot of opportunities to entertain. I would include Matthew because it was sort of flesh out the evening. And he was a reliable member of our group because I could stick him anywhere at a table and he would perform. And he was especially great with middle-aged women. If I put him beside a middle-aged woman, I knew they'd both have a good time. And it was wonderful having him in my life because he was fun. He was interesting. He had the capacity to surprise, even though I was skeptical of some of the things he told me.
For example?
The very first time I met him, he told me he lived at the Pierre Hotel in an apartment that his grandparents owned. And I thought this sounded pretty amazing. The Pierre Hotel is a very ritzy address in New York. So I asked him what his grandparents did. And he told me, and I misunderstood. I thought he said they were into baking. So my question was, what did they do? Invent Wonder Bread? And he's like, no, banking. And then it just made sense. Oh, he's like a trust fund kid killing time on a TV set. And I didn't think anything of it. But it was so fantastic that I would sort of ask follow-up questions. For instance, in 2015, my husband and I were having our 10th wedding anniversary, and we had these physical invitations. And I thought, well, this is a chance to see if I could mail something to the Pierre, because in the back of my mind, it always seemed a little too outrageous. So I specifically asked him for his mailing address, confirming the address at the Pierre, and he gave me a P.O. box, but it was 2 miles north, like practically in Harlem. And it seemed odd and unlikely, but not the sort of thing I was going to challenge him on because I just figured he was a young actor. Maybe he was trying to conceal the fact he had a sugar daddy, or maybe he was a doorman at the Pierre. And it didn't matter because it's not like he ever asked me for anything. And I liked his stories. They were entertaining. And if he was in a fake it till you make it kind of mode, I was happy to play along. And this continued. And so when he got the job with Courtney Ross, I just thought, oh, this is going to be great. He's going to grow up. He's going to grow out of this fabulous, fictitious life he created. And he's going to have like the real life he deserves. And it seemed to work that way. And then when he spoke of working at the Soroses, I thought, man, he's finally figured it out. He's able to afford the life he once pretended he had. But aspects of what he was speaking of never made sense to me. And, I wish I dug a little bit deeper. But quite frankly, I think if I had, I would have been shut out. There was this tension between my curiosity and his willingness to share his life.
And Jane, what do we know about his sudden death?
He had been in London the prior week, ostensibly starting this new job with the Qatari royal family. Through mutual friends, I learned that instead of doing all the things you'd expect someone to do who was starting a new job, he was going to the theater with friends. He got a facial, he had Pilates classes, and then he returned to New York unexpectedly, ahead of schedule. He was supposed to be back the weekend of the 31st. I was going to have dinner with him on June 3rd. And he arrived back, I think, May 28th. He went to the American Ballet Theater Gala with a friend. Then the next day, I'm told he had an appointment with one of his dermatologists. And then that night, he passed away in his bed. He was found the next morning by his housekeeper. He just went to sleep and didn't wake up.
Let me ask you, though, as you sort of note in your story, You talk about The Matthews Show, and, you talk about his generosity being, as you said, delirious, and you talk about going to Courchevel with him, where he ostensibly tips two of the concierges $25,000 each, $50,000 total. And, he travels with his laser facialist, his trainer, all part of these gigantic entourages moving around the world. I know he's a friend of yours, but Qatari royal family, supposedly, the Soros family running the family office and making, planning all these family meetings for them and everything, all of whom seem to go silent after his death, right? Are we talking about someone who executed a gigantic grift?
It would not surprise me in the least. I can't know. The victims are unlikely to tell us if there are victims, but that's the only thing that makes sense to me. So let's say he was a really valued member of the Soros family office. What does that pay? A couple $1,000,000 a year? Frankly, I don't think he was getting that much. I think he was a personal assistant to the most reclusive of them, but how can I know? So let's say he was earning a couple $1,000,000 a year. That doesn't explain how he could give $5-6 million to the Frick. Each of these galas had to set him back $500,000 to $1 million. In the last few months where he was alive, there had to have been 6 of these events. There was the free opening, there was the Frick Young Collectors, there was the Salome opening at the Met, there was on stage at the Met where he was the chair. All of this stuff reflects an outlay of cash that's extraordinary. You can't do that on a couple $1,000,000 a year. This is the stuff of billionaires. I would get home after one of these galas baffled.
After his death, you'd heard rumors that some of his charitable donations had been flagged as fraudulent. You'd heard rumors that perhaps the Soros family and perhaps the Ross camp had been speaking that they realized there was outright theft. So I'm just saying, I know, unfortunately, he's passed.
It smells really bad, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it would be one of the most insane grifts ever, that if he was able to execute all this.
It's astonishing to me. And quite frankly, I feel a little used. Matthew networked through our social circles. We incorporated him into our life. We included him in important corporate and philanthropic events that were near and dear to us. And people wanted to meet him because, of the connection with the Soros family, and he was eager to meet them in turn. It was a very subtle game, I believe he was playing, where, he established himself as a very sexy, flashy lure and allowed the fish to swim to him. And, props to him for performing so well. And I didn't think of him as much of an actor when we were working as background actors at Law and Order, but I think when it came right down to it, he put on an excellent performance.
Well, Jane, I think we're all thinking the same thing, which is this is going to be a fabulous scripted series at some point. So thank you so much for sharing your memories of him with us.
You're most welcome. I adored the guy, so it's really frustrating and agonizing that I can't ask him these questions himself and then maybe give him a slap, because really, he didn't have to take it to such an extreme, because I think it was the extreme that ultimately did him in.
Thanks so much, Jane.
Thank you.
Before we leave the world of scandal entirely, our colleague Elena Clavarino is here to tell us about some of the most treasured statues in Italy that may have a rather different provenance than the one that is commonly believed. Elena is the senior editor at Airmail, who's based in Milan. Welcome, Elena.
Hi, good morning.
So your story this week takes us to the Rainbow Coast of Calabria and investigates the intriguing backstory behind 2 of its, I suppose we could say, natural wonders or perhaps unnatural wonders. Tell us about these beautiful bronzes.
Yeah, so these beautiful bronzes, they date back to the 5th century BC, and they're kind of technically perfect. They're 2 warriors, and they're kind of, technically perfect. And basically, they were discovered off the coast in the ocean by a diver in 1972. And they're very rare because bronze was looted in antiquity and melted down. So there are not many sculptures like this left in the world. and they're very beautiful.
And how were they originally discovered and brought back into the public life?
So there was a diver called Stefano Mariottini, and he was on holiday with his girlfriend, a chemist from Rome. And he was scuba diving off the coast of Calabria, and he spotted under the seabed a hand of one of them. And he thought at first, he thought he'd seen a dead body. And then he kind of started clearing the sand away, and he realized, that these were statues. So he alerted the police, and this rescue mission ensued over the next few days. And yeah, it was a miracle when they were found. It was all over the press, and it was a sensation.
And when was this, Elena?
This was August 16th of 1972.
And so what has happened in the ensuing 50-something years? I mean, these have become a massive pride of Calabria, right? Like tourists from all over the world come and see them. They're exhibited. Where are they exhibited exactly?
They're exhibited in Reggio Calabria, the Calabria's biggest city, in a room on anti-seismic marble in this museum that I went a few weeks ago. And you have, crowds lining up at all hours of the day waiting to see them.
So recently they've been in the news again, and not just because they are so beautiful, but instead the backstory of how they came into being is somewhat contested. So take us inside this latest controversy.
One of our national news networks called TG1 did an investigation into their provenance and also the way that they were found. There have been since the 80s there's been research that indicates that they don't originate from Calabria, and they actually originate from further down the coast in Brucoli, Sicily, which is many miles further down and not kind of marked as a trade route from Sicily to Greece at that time. Wouldn't have taken you past Calabria, so it's odd that they were found there. And then in recent research, they found that some of the clay used to join their cast parts came from the Anapo River near Syracuse. So in 2023, there was confirmation of this, that they at some point must have been in Syracuse. Either they were assembled or reassembled in Sicily. And so this whole investigation has ensued of how did they end up, on the Calabrian seabed. Obviously, it's a very interesting story because you have, the Calabrese mafia, the 'Ndrangheta, and then you had Sicily's Cosa Nostra. And a lot of people think kind of this was a result of a deal between the two mafias.
Okay, give us your best conspiracy theory as to what exactly happened and how the mafia was involved in the trade of these statues.
The conspiracy theory is that in 1971, a group of scuba divers saw them off the coast of Sicily, and then the mafia got involved, and they were transported on a ship to Calabria where they were cleaned, and then they were kind of sold off in parts. And there's reason to think that Robert Hecht, who is an American antiquities dealer, who was later indicted for trafficking, was involved because he had a booklet, let's say, where he kept like kind of a shopping list of the illicit objects he traded. And one entry reads, 5 statues plus 2 lions, Sicily. And all these people from this town in Brucoli say that they saw more than 2 statues and that there were in fact 5 and 2 lions. And multiple testimonies kind of echo this.
And Elena, is there any sense, if there were 5 and plus the lion, that were they broken up then into pieces or sold off? Or then anyone ever tracked any of these others to any place?
There's suspicion. So one helmet is suspected of being in the possession of the Getty Museum. There was a testimony back in 1981. An anonymous trafficker had told one of our national newspapers that one of these helmets had been sold to the Getty for $6,000. At the Cleveland Museum of Art, there's a statue called the Apollo Saurochthonus, I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, that kind of matches a description in Mariottini's original police report. So, there's a lot of suspicions, but nobody knows where this stuff is for sure.
And part of the romance of this story, right, is the great unknowability of it all. As much as we love to believe that the original version could be true, that they were just serendipitously discovered by a diver, I'm also kind of more intrigued by the conspiracy theories around it. How do you feel?
I agree. Who knows? And it's, it's just incredible that it was also, an era when people were plundering all over the place and looting, and it was the 70s, so, and things kind of ended up everywhere. And there's kind of a romance to that too.
And you've seen these in person recently. How beautiful are they anyway?
They are really, really stunning. I would say they rival Michelangelo's David, but then it's incredible because they're, many, many years older. Absolutely stunning. I really recommend that people go to see them. They're very famous, but I still think that a lot of people kind of skip that on their, Italy tours. And it's definitely something to go see.
Elena, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Michael, have you ever seen the bronzes?
I haven't. But next time I'm in Italy down there, I want to see. I've been to Sicily and I wish I'd had thought to go see them. Have you?
No, I haven't. I mean, I'm sort of the same. I'm a bad Italian tourist, apparently. I'm not checking out the things I need to be checking out. So next time, another item for the list.
I know. I was too busy eating gelato.
Guilty. Well, one thing we have done is seen plenty of Clint Eastwood movies, and a new book is out to explain even more about the filmmaker we know and love. Sean Levy is here to discuss his new book, Clint, the Man and His Movies. Welcome, Sean.
Howdy.
So I learned a lot in your inside story about Clint Eastwood. First and foremost, I did not realize that he was basically a billionaire, but you tackle so much of his life and times in this book. And I'd love to know why, in particular, you decided that Eastwood was worthy of this kind of a close look.
Well, just from a sheer historical perspective, we're looking at someone with a 70-year acting career and a 50-year directing career. There's nobody in Hollywood history really with those credentials. And at a very high level, one of the most popular stars ever in Hollywood, two-time Best Picture director. And he's just an interesting guy. In addition to a film career, he's had a political presence. He's had a presence in the worlds of ecological conservation and business. He owns the Pebble Beach golf links. He's been an American icon and symbol. I'm 63 years old for about most of my life. So yeah, there's a whole book in that guy.
And he's managed to retain his allure among generation after generation. I mean, what is it about the sheer force of his talent that has allowed him to do that?
Well, he's very good at conserving his energy. When he first entered the public mind, it was as this taciturn guy, only moved to shoot and this sort of thing. But if you think about it in another sense, he's kind of reserved and shy and only acts or speaks when it's necessary. And I think there's something compelling about that to an audience. He's also very smart about marshaling his persona. He spends the first half of his career more or less as a vigilante or a killing machine. But the more important half of his career, which runs until last year, explores the cost of violence in a way I think feels very contemporary and realistic. His single most successful commercial film, American Sniper, came out only 10 years ago.
Sean, I think that's what's so interesting to me about Clint is most people think like he's had this phenomenally successful creative directing career. However, as you sort of note in the book and we understand is, this is a guy who is one of the last links to the studio era. He came up as a contract player in the system in the 50s, making B movies and then, Westerns on TV. And, he didn't direct his first movie, which, Play Misty for Me, until he was in his 40s. And even then, he doesn't really break through. People forget that Unforgiven was his first Oscar winner, and that was in his mid-60s, right? So he's had this, this career that he's just kept building, and sort of like he hits his, I always think like his creative peak as a director from 65 to 75, 80, which is also unprecedented, really, when you think about it, and very inspiring.
There's no way to find stats on something like this, but, Warner Brothers released, barely, a film of his last year, Juror Number 2. He was 94. There have been directors of feature films older than that, but not funded by an American movie studio and not working with American crews and stars. You look at the streak he did in his 70s, Mystic River, $1 Million Baby, and 2 films about the Battle of Iwo Jima, one in Japanese. That's 4 films in about 6 years, all of very high quality in his 70s. He's a lifelong fitness and health nut. He was eating, newspapers used quote marks to describe yogurt and wheat bread in the 1950s. He's also practiced transcendental meditation most every day for 50 years. So he's marshaled his vessel, as it were, very well. There's an anecdote in the book where he's on a film set and the crew are eating pizza at the craft service table. And someone says, "Hey, Clint, you want a piece of pizza?" And he looks over and he kind of sneers and he says, "No, thanks. I've got other films I want to direct."
He also sort of runs these, as you said, it's it's, I think, a testament to his creative ability to sort of keep his intentions straight. But he makes basically, or has, almost a film a year every 18 months. Again, I think to me, it's he comes out of that studio system. He's very prepared, knows what he wants to do. He works with the same sort of like crew, often across decades. And he's very efficient at these things and very dedicated, right?
He's a lifelong jazz fan. His mother turned him on to jazz piano when he was a boy. He still has the piano he learned to play on. And I think that's an essence of his aesthetic, and it helps him work fast. The crew knows each other's language. They can improvise literally when something goes awry on set. He often shoots the script that he reads and doesn't go through years of rewrites. He's fond of filming rehearsals and using first takes in the final cut. There's an anecdote of Meryl Streep seeing the final cut of Bridges of Madison County, in which he co-stars with Clint, he directed. And she says, "You kept all my mistakes in it." He says, "Yes, but they were human mistakes." And that to me bespeaks the jazz fan. It's okay if something goes wrong. The great Miles Davis adage, there's no wrong notes. It only depends what you play next. And I think Clint's directing and career style adheres to that maxim.
It's easy to see him as the guy from, the Sergio Leone movies, from the Dirty Harry films, which, as you note in your column this week, very much about violence, but he's made these films that are also very about the consequences of violence in society. And I think especially that's why I've always loved Unforgiven, especially because it sort of gets at what is the cost of justice and how do you navigate these worlds.
And I think it's even there at the beginning. We think of the man with no name in Dirty Harry as killing machines, but look at those guys. They're completely isolated. They have a grimace of pain and past hurt that they never articulate, but clearly they're damaged. You wouldn't want to trade places with those guys. Later, when Clint truly has the reins of his career, he explores this in a number of ways. Even Juror Number 2, made last year, which is sort of a courtroom drama that feels a little bit like 12 Angry Men, explores the consequences of an act of accidental violence. American Sniper, the most prolific killing machine in American military history, Chris Kyle. The movie is about how tortured he is, not about how great a shot he is. And this is, I think, there is something in Clint who says, I got here on the back of shooting. What does shooting actually mean?
What are we going to lose when Clint is gone?
Well, he is truly, as you say, the last connection to the studio era, and even to the era of old-fashioned TV. There are still some TV stars, of course, kicking around from the 70s, even the 90s. But Clint was in 217 hours of TV Western. I think that's more than the total he's on screen in his entire film career. So, we do lose that, and we lose the last sort of consensus movie star. There was a time when the Quigley box office poll of annual earners at the ticket selling stars really was a litmus test or a measure of the cultural temperature in a given time. And we're so diverse in where we get our media, what media we take in, the corporate sources of that. Clint comes from a more monolithic time, and it's not monolithic in the sense of imposing itself. It's monolithic in the sense of we all gathered around the same hearth. And he's really, there are some survivors from that era, but they're not active the way he is. So I think also there's a brand of American manhood that's a very complex and not remotely inarguably laudable thing, but he is a vestige of it. And we've seen poorer exemplars of it in the culture, more morally compromised and more avaricious and mean. And, I'm glad I wasn't an employee of Clint's, because I might have run afoul of him and seen the temper. But I think he does represent an old-fashioned Americana and American pack of values that we don't have anywhere else any longer.
Yeah, I would think he's somewhere along that, the profile of Abe Lincoln and Joe DiMaggio and, that kind of figure in the cultural landscape. We're not going to see that like again, probably ever.
Yeah, I can't think of someone today. I mean, who's the biggest movie star? Is it Tom Cruise? Long live Tom Cruise. He doesn't seem to carry the same set of symbology, the same history that Clint Eastwood was able to embody almost by accident. He didn't shoot a movie entirely in Los Angeles as an actor until 1984. He kept Hollywood at arm's length and maybe an arm holding a stick. He knew that if you stayed in that racket, you were going to, take the hits that would bring you down.
Well, Sean, thank you so much. Congratulations on the book.
Thanks so kindly.
Thanks so much, Sean.
There's only one place to discover a global snapshot of the current cultural scene. Airmail's Arts Intel Report. Our international research tool for what to do and where and when to do it is user-friendly, continuously updated, and meticulously curated. Arts Intel is handy at home, on the road, and when you're planning your next trip. It also includes indispensable lists of restaurants and hotels in key cities around the world, recommended by our well-traveled experts. Explore Arts Intel at airmail.news/arts-intel, and be sure to sign up for our Week in Culture newsletter, which is published every Wednesday afternoon at airmail.news/WIC. I'm Chris Garrett, Airmail Deputy Editor, and I never leave home without it. Bon voyage.
Okay, Michael, I had to ask, what's your favorite Eastwood film?
Oh, good one. I don't know. I always have a fondness for Play Misty for me because it was his first one he directed, and I love the soundtrack. How about you?
Probably Back to the Future. Dirty Harry, maybe.
Oh.
Good, Bad, and the Ugly? I don't know. There's so many.
Can't go wrong with the early ones, see?
It's not a bad idea to have a Clint Eastwood Film Festival this summer. Perhaps that should be our recommendation for this week.
You go for it.
Well, on that note, Michael, it is the weekend. I know you've got something delicious to recommend to us.
Yeah, I do. Speaking of old film stars and actors from the past, have you seen this documentary, My Mom, Jane?
No.
It's a documentary. It just is gone up on HBO Max by Mariska Hargitay.
Oh, yeah.
And it's her feature film directorial debut. And in it, she's kind of grappling with this public and private legacy of her mother, who was the actress Jane Mansfield, who was in the 60s, the epitome of the blonde bombshell. Anyway, it had its premiere in Cannes back in the spring. And it's sort of, not just about Mansfield's life and career, but also, as many of you probably know, the way that her 1967 death in this car crash impacted Mansfield's children, 3 of whom, including Hargitay, were in the vehicle at the time, and they all survived. She, of course, tragically died. And this is, it's not just another sort of like child of someone famous doing a documentary. It's very riveting. And Hargitay was just 3 at the time of the accident. And she discusses, how she spent the last 60 years juggling her grief and resentment and a rather large secret, which I won't spoil, about herself that she shares for the first time. It's a terrific, compelling documentary. It's called My Mom, Jane, and it is on HBO Max now. And you, my dear?
Intriguing. I can't wait to see it. Well, Michael, in decidedly less highfalutin topics of film and television, I did see the new F1 film.
And?
I really liked it. I mean, Brad Pitt, I hate to say it, he's kind of at the height of his powers cinematically. He's like the Tom Cruise type of 60-something actor who looks 40 years old and is in incredible shape and is inspiring me to work out harder at the gym. I was a fan.
It's the perfect summer movie, right?
His love interest is Ursula from Bad Sisters. So what's not to love about that?
And if you want to see a really good one, speaking of film festival, there's one movie from the past called Grand Prix made by John Frankenheimer in the 60s. And it kind of was the first great kind of race car movie. So that's probably streaming somewhere. It's a good thing to check out.
See, I thought I wasn't even remotely interested in race cars, and yet here we are. I'm now a fan.
Here you are.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Wish you a wonderful weekend. Michael, will you please read us out?
Morning Meeting is produced by Airplay Productions and edited by Jesse Cannon. Our coders are Graydon Carter and Alexander Stanley. Our chief operating officer is Bill Keenan. And our deputy editors are Ashley Baker, Chris Garrett, Nathan King, Julie Vitale, and Ash Carter. Our CMO is Emily Davis, and our music supervisor is Randall Poster. Our theme music is The Cute Monster by the Buddy Collette Quintet. A new edition of Airmail is published every Saturday, so please subscribe and enjoy all of our stories on airmail.news, which we update every day. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Airmail Weekly. We will be back here next Saturday with another edition of Morning Meeting. But in the meantime, be sure to subscribe at Spotify or Apple Music. But most of all, thank you again for joining us.